Welcome to Candy Bomber, a channel dedicated to human affairs of past, present, and future. This time, the insult that wasn't, and how the enlightened French created Russophobia. The Battle of Poltava in 1709 was the most important in the Great Northern War that ended with the victory of Russia and marked the end of the Swedish Empire as a European continental superpower. Where is the city of Poltava? In modern Ukraine, in the ancient lands of the Rus. Peter the Great, king of all the Russias, and had repelled yet another invasion into Mother Russia. Invasions which have been a frightening and ferocious regular event for Russia and the Rus for centuries. The most fashionable and famous French intellectual of the times, Voltaire, which with amazing clarity and amazing lack of judgment, considered the Battle of Poltava in the Ukraine of the Rus as a fateful event of great humanity in halting the expansion of autocratic kingdoms such as Poland and Sweden. A victory for civilization, the sexes, whatever that means, against anarchy and intolerance. He uttered these as magic words. It's a miracle that Voltaire did not include the triumph of law and nature, or the law of nature. There is no reason or rhyme on why this is a success for intolerance or tolerance. As if Voltaire had pre-channeled or had a premonition of the future, such as the filmmaker W.D. Griffith's early 20th century movie epic, Intolerance, a similar projection of the narrative onto Russia, just as W.D. Griffith did onto the Babylonians. It's also interesting to note that Voltaire had many love-hate relationships with many countries, especially the Spanish Empire and Russia, which can be seen as the Americas and the great frontier of Eurasia. For instance, his contradictions lay in when he was exiled by Louis XIV in his many criticisms of France. He ended up in Austria, and lacking money, he sank every silver dollar he had, his whole fortune, into the trading companies of Sevilla, or the trading company of the Indias and Americas. And despite running down the Spanish Empire into oblivion, as he did all his life, he made a small fortune out of the supposed economic catastrophe that was the Spanish Empire. It made him a fortune, and he returned to the salons of Paris a wealthy man. In fact, the Spanish doubloons, the Spanish pieces of 8, opened the doors of the salons once he returned to France, in which he would degrade Russia and praise Russia, and degrade Spain and praise Spain as the fashion dictated. This was Voltaire, the archetypical intellectual of France. This may be the first time, but not the last time, a French intellectual would project their enlightened beliefs onto Russian actions. The usual histories consider that Russophobia was born in Great Britain. Many in historical circles will say during the Crimean War, and specifically because of this conflict. In reality, it emerged at least a century earlier during a period that produced prejudices and phobias like few other times in Western history, especially during the Enlightenment. By the Enlightened, and specifically in France. It is at this time that the themes of Russophobia were created, which will then be repeated ad nauseum during the Crimean War till now. This war propaganda does not invent anything new, but it is based on an already created enlightened view by the enlightened. Why does Russophobia arise in newly enlightened France? This is what we want to know. Western Europe learns that Russia exists other than a series of wooden towns surrounded by frontiers, a forest Eurasian barberland. When the 6'8" tall Peter the Great, Tsar of all the Russias, that's right, 6'8", executes an extraordinary journey, the Grand Embassy across Europe, but not France. Because apart from learning the inventions of the West as the epitome of a Renaissance prince, however late, the Tsar seeks primarily Christian allies to help fight the Ottoman Turks who constantly raid and invade the Russian lands, especially in Crimea. France is excluded not because of a cultural, intellectual, or scientific snub, but precisely at this moment in history, France is the best and closest ally of the Ottoman Empire against all other European kingdoms. Peter's legendary journey, living as a common shipbuilding carpenter or shipwright, sober and talented in the Amsterdam dockyards in Holland, surrounded every day by crowds who would come to watch this King of Russia's wear workman clothes in the docks, learning how to build the most modern ships of the time, which were being built in Holland, and later he would go to the other realm of William III, who was Dutch dynasty of the House of Orange. And so at that time, the Holland dynasty, or the Netherlands dynasty of the House of Orange, ruled England and Holland. People won't tell you this. They won't tell you that the Dutch ruled England, William I of Orange, William II, and William III. But nobody wants to talk about that. In contrast, when Peter visited England, he changed completely. He became this Renaissance come enlightened rockstar punk grog fueled animal, party animal, the destroyer of Sayes Court Manor at Deptford dockyards in Greenwich in England. Goes down in historical legend in England and the rest of Europe. In fact, so much damage was done to Sayes Court Manor that the genius architect Christopher Wren was ordered by William III to account for all the damage and to assess how much must be paid. Christopher Wren also paid for some wheelbarrows that were destroyed during partying. Now, the parties consisted, reports that are quite accurate, of pig races, barrel races, and drug-fueled antics, including the demolition of one side of the manor. Now, we're not too sure whether the pigs were sitting in the barrels full of grog as the party races were enacted. However, we do know that Christopher Wren paid for the wheelbarrows. Yet in the end, Peter's journey to secure nations in the defense of Christian Europe will be fruitless. From this point on, France took an interest in Russia in a very special way. It is this strange predilection of the enlightened French intellectuals that persists till this day. Whatever happens, they must be loved or hated and never ignored. In our next installment, we will see how this strange inflicted fascination cemented French foundational beliefs by which that heartless and fickle mistress, Russia, at one time or another seduced and taunted the always wronged supposed benefactor, France. Thank you.